Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friends Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and I am currently sweating through what is, I think, being declared actually a heat wave in the northern provinces of South Africa. Today, I'm joined by Mr. Marius Roodt, who has recently had electricity returned to his house after a 24-hour outage. Marius, how are you doing?
How's it, guys? It's nice to be able to boil kettles and charge computers and cell phones and stuff again.
I know, such luxuries that we have these days. Exactly. And of course, also Sara gone. Sara, how are you doing? I trust that you have electricity at the moment.
I'm not actually sure. I think I may be running on spare stuff, but because I've lost track, kind of lost track. But as you say, it's pretty warm.
Indeed, and it is once again. I'm also without electricity. Not because of load shedding, but possibly because of a load shedding induced normal power outage. So isn't that just wonderful? Hopefully my battery will last for the duration of the show, but if it doesn't and there's a weird ending to the show, well, that's why. Anyway, let us get into the news of today, and we're going to start off, of course, with the thing that's really annoying everyone right now, and that is Eskom CEO Andre de Ruyter, who claims over recent weeks to have found a bug, as in a microchip used for spying, in his car. So according to Andre de Ruyter, a sophisticated bugging device was found in the car, in his car last week. He discovered the device, which is a small microchip with an antenna and batteries, and he approached two experts in intelligence and forensics with photographs of the device, which is about the size of a postage stamp. The experts confirmed the device had a low-frequency transmission capacity with location and potentially audio recording capabilities. One of the experts pointed out that some identifying marks on the chip had been etched off in an apparent attempt to stymie identification of the manufacturer. De Ruyter said to the Sunday Times that he found the device under the driver's seat of his car. Bluetooth cell phone connectivity means De Ruyter would have potentially confidential conversations over the system in his vehicle, so presumably using the hands-free system to take calls, which were potentially audible to those who had installed the device. This bugging device, according to one of the experts, was not something an ordinary private detective would use. And it's not available on the open market. We're talking about a sophisticated national security agency level device, typically used by law enforcement and intelligence agencies that can send and receive signals. This comes just after there's been lots of rumors recently, and we talked a little bit about them last week, about how there are rumors that cabinet has taken against Andre de Ruyter and want him fired. That Pravin Gordhan is at least considering it, although he hasn't done it yet, despite some expectations that he would. However, Pravin Gordhan did fire, or at least replace, the entirety of the Eskom board last week. He's put some people who were previously on the board back on the board, so I'm not sure how much of a regeneration this really is. But we've heard many kind of anecdotal stories and allegations of corruption from Eskom, which suggest that the internal rot inside the organization is extreme. Stuff about how I heard a story about how coal deliveries were coming in, and apparently the security guards were in cahoots with the coal delivery drivers, who would sign off the books that the coal had been delivered, and they'd simply go around and then deliver it again so that they could try and be paid twice for it. That kind of just endemic corruption. And now apparently there's bugging going on and maybe all kinds of other skullduggery. Sara, it really feels a little bit like Game of Thrones inside Eskom. What do you make of all of this?
Yeah, it's Game of Thrones, but bloodier. The problem, of course, is that you've got you've got Pravin changing the board, and the real problem is, well, not the real problem. I mean, the problem may well be with the board. At least there's some engineers on the board at last. But the problem is, of course, that it's not the board that needs changing so much as the ministries that are responsible for Eskom, including and most specifically Pravin Gordhan's ministry. Because, I mean, if you're not allowed to retrench excess workforce, you're not allowed to hire skills that you need and don't have, or experience that you need and don't have, and you've got to pay your staff, above inflation increases. Well, they were above inflation. I'm not sure if they are anymore. It's really not about the board anymore. But what is of concern is that the chairman of the board was there at a time when one wouldn't have liked him to be there. He has some association with some of the murk that's happened. I just forget his name offhand. So it's literally like shuffling the watsits on the Titanic, because it's not where the problem lies. The problem lies at government, at the feet of government. The board, if the board can't do everything the board thinks it needs to do because it's being blocked by Gordon and his department, then it literally nothing's likely to change much. And as far as I know, the changing of, obviously the influence is one thing, but the changing of the CEO is a board imperative, not Gordon's. Well, not strictly speaking.
I suspect in practice, Gordon says jump and the board says how high. But this is just, we once again are in the sort of pantomime of when there were all these rumors circulating last week that the Ruyter might be fired. I just kind of thought, another CEO. Oh yeah, sure. That's really what's going to fix the Eskom problems now. It's not that we haven't had 1 million in the last few years. No, this time, guys, we'll get it right. And this is because, of course, the real problems can't be fixed because they're too politically costly, at least for the ANC's patronage networks. The minister has to discipline staff members and corrupt cadres who perhaps are connected to people in the Thule House. The minister would have to take a harder line with unions who are needed to do things before the electoral conference of the ANC. And lots of people, of course, making money off of all of these coal contracts and procurement jobs and everything else. Marius, what do you make of this? Am I right to be so exasperated that the problem here is political rather than management?
Yeah, I think that's right. But just to be a bit contrarian, I was just looking at the people on the board now. Obviously I don't know many of the people, but just reading their little biographies that you can get hold of, it seems that most of them are people who are either engineers or kind of have experience in electricity distribution or whatever the cases. Maybe some people say Becky and Charlie, who's on the board, he's a former COSATU guy, but maybe that's a good thing. You need somebody who's inside with Labour and so on to be on the board. Maybe this is grasping at straws, but maybe this is kind of at least the board. The board's been it's only had 7 people for however long it's been. We're supposed to have 13. Finally, the board's got enough people and does seem to have people who actually have a grasp of the situation, as I say, people who are actual engineers and finance people going to actually understand what needs to be done to fix Eskom. So maybe this is one, the thin end of the wedge, but. As you say, a lot of these issues are political, and it's actually mind-blowing that the government has a monopoly on supplying electricity, which it can't even do, which tells you something. There's obviously this ideological, ideological underpinning of this, where the ANC can't let go of central control and look towards privatization, or even, it don't even have to be privatization, but, letting provinces or municipalities access electricity from other sources, or just mines and these big kind of factories like smelters and so on, be able to produce their own electricity, which the government really seems not keen on doing, because that's also kind of the first step in breaking up of Eskom and Eskom's control of the electricity supply.
I must say that I was quite skeptical of De Ruyter when he came in, but I think that based off of some of the interviews he's given, including to our sister channel, the CRA, that he has a pretty good grasp of some of the things that need to be done to fix Eskom. It's also clear to me that he really, and maybe you're right also about the board, that it does actually have some people who know what needs to be done. But the problem, once again, is that they're not being allowed to do the things they need to do. They're not allowed to cancel all of these corrupt contracts. And so we've gotten to the stage where it's, De Ruyter goes before the media and then kind of in sort of quite coded language kind of suggests, guys, please, I'm really trying my best. Please, can government help me out here? and seems to be ignored. I don't know. Maybe I'm just writing a narrative in my own head. Sorry, your final thoughts on this?
Yeah, I see Johan makes the point that they had some form of exemption from BBBEE to get proper resources, but that exemption had a very finite period. They want to apply again to get that space, and that in itself, every gap is a period of wastage and a lost opportunity.
Indeed, indeed. All right, let's move on to our next story. And this is based off of a long article in the Daily Maverick, which is just talking about some of the drama that's been going on behind the scenes at the University of Cape Town, UCT, where apparently, according to this report, almost half of the senior leadership of UCT has disappeared, has left over the past 4 years. And the UCT Council is described in this report as increasingly toxic, with accusations of racism and claims of cover-up. And now there is an accusation that the Vice Chancellor Pakeng, and the chair of the UCT Council, Ngoyama, have deliberately misled the university's governing bodies. So we won't go into all of the details around all of this, but some of the accusations made here about Pakeng is that she is bullying people and sort of pushing people around to get her own way. And a lot of the staff are very unhappy about this. It's just why some of them have resigned. Apparently, also, according to some of the people who spoke to the Daily Maverick, Pakeng paints her critics as enemies of transformation who are unwilling to accept the authority of a black woman at the head of a historically predominantly white institution. She's been criticized for supposedly not taking academics that seriously. Then the EFF has leapt to her defense, however, saying that she has faced a poisonous smear campaign operating on the racist trope that a black woman in power is irrational, temperamental, and prone to emotionality and bullying. The former ombudsman said that she was accused. She brought some of the complaints about the Vice Chancellor forward for investigation, and she was firstly shocked by how all of the people making the complaints were scared of attaching their name to these complaints, saying that they feared retaliation by the Vice Chancellor, but also that she was annoyed that she had been characterized as being some sort of puppet of white interests at the university who had been weaponized to tear down a black woman. Then another sort of little detail about this is there was, of course, that horrible fire at UCT relatively recently. I think it was last year in April, and some things burned down, including some irreplaceable books. And there was a lot of discussions about what to replace the burnt buildings with. And according to this report, the Vice Chancellor at some point suggested that the burnt down buildings be replaced with like a garden space with Wi-Fi that would have a place where people can just sit and relax while playing with Lego blocks. Sarah, what do you make of this whole shebang?
Yeah, you see,
is UCT in big trouble?
UCT's been in trouble for a long time, but over her term, it's got worse. And the funny thing about accusing sort of white supremacist plots for this is that it's increasingly become a space where black academics and black staff have a problem with Pakeng. So it's if it may have started off with a few white academics who were on a different political and by no means conservative playing field to her. Pakeng, by all accounts, has a sort of operational style. She can be very aggressive. She can be very, I'm trying to think of the right word, perhaps she can be a bit Cruella de Vil-like, but then she can suddenly become sort of the friend of the young students. She's one of the fallers who really deserve to be imprisoned, actually, not just expelled. He got his honors, and she praised him, when he was capped for getting through. And she's very a little bit concerned about the language, and the language at the end of the honors of the thesis was "one settler, one bullet." So I think she's very, very controversial. She and the ombudsperson or whatever really had a wingding. But I think the problem is that the council has become increasingly under her sway. Clearly, the council chairperson is a supporter or supportive of her, and so what you've tended to have is academics who've been on the council have stayed once they have left and not returned. So it's become a bit of a cesspit, the whole place. I suspect that she was never quite a vice chancellor material. But I think this sort of this sort of vast range between the one side of her personality and the other do not make her a good person for transformation of the university. Her transformation has looked very sort of, shall we say, obvious and unsubtle over her tenure. But she's the general press is that she's not liked.
So it's interesting to see, the Daily Maverick is, I would say, sympathetic to many of the kind of the transformation agenda. Let's put it like that. And in their piece, they put on paragraphs about how, there are these transformation issues at the university, and then it sort of ends with that. But the section of the article is called "Transformation Debates Used as a quote fig leaf." And Marius, that really seems to be the thing that sticks out to me as someone from the Institute of Race Relations here, is that once again we're seeing kind of people in elite circles using race hustling, kind of racial mobilization, racial shaming as a fig leaf for which to pursue their kind of their more mundane agendas, which in this case is maybe eliminating enemies at the university who are trying to stand in the way of your control of it. The other thing I wanted to talk about is it's something you mentioned, and you can go on to this afterwards, but the infantilization of students. But let's start off with the first one. Am I right to say that?
Yeah, I think so. It's typical South African race at the bottom, where often when a black person is criticized, you get told that any of this critique is only because people who criticize them are, they're either white racists or they, black people that are controlled by whites or whatever kind of rubbish. And it's just, it's just boring. And, I'm sure there probably are instances where a black person leadership is criticized and there are racist reasons behind it, but I would imagine those are very rare, especially in South Africa today. And as I say, just typical race to the bottom, just trying to shut down any debate about,
particularly in UCT, which if you've met students, particularly from the humanities departments of UCT, you'll know that place churns out kind of sort of anti-racist activists, quote unquote, anti-racist.
I'm sure the academics are probably the same. Right, academics exactly. At UCT. I mean, there was it's from the US, but you can probably carry some of the survey results over to South Africa. Is that most lecturers and academics in the US are pretty left-wing or centre-left and so on. Very few of them self-identify as Republicans. And I'm pretty sure that's probably the same in South Africa, where most people who are academics and so on probably consider themselves left or socialist or whatever the case is. And yeah, I mean, as with this infantilization of people, I mean, garden where you can go play with Lego blocks. I mean, the thing is, when people, you wouldn't even do that in a high school, never mind a university. People, if you're over, okay, some people go to varsity, they're 17, but the vast majority of people who go to university are legal adults. They're 18 or older. Some people are even in their 20s when they start studying and what have you. They're adults, and they don't need to go play with Lego blocks. If they're bored, they can find something to do. And if they want Lego blocks, they can go play Lego blocks at home or in their res room or whatever. They don't need to go to varsity. Should be a place of learning and discussion and so on. And sure, there must be places to have enjoy yourself, but I mean, Lego blocks are for kids. You don't need to give those to students or whatever the case is. And I see somebody's mentioned David Benatar's book. I'll show you guys. I haven't read this yet though, but it will be somewhere to be read, pal. So that's if anybody's unaware, that's David Benatar's account of what's been happening at UCT over the past decade or probably. And he's probably been one of the bravest academics in South Africa to speak out against a lot of the things that he sees as going wrong in the universities, especially UCT. I mean, I don't want to call it South Africa's premier university because I didn't go there. I'd say the University of Johannesburg or Wits is probably the best.
This Daily Maverick piece is not afraid of calling it South Africa's top university.
I mean, if you look at the rankings, it is the top university, but this kind of thing probably doesn't do well. I mean, that's also if you believe these rankings. A lot of issues with those anyway. But obviously, this kind of thing isn't going to help UCT. And obviously, anybody who's cares about South Africa in general and higher education in South Africa, this kind of thing that's happening at UCT isn't great. And we also, hope it's not, and leaving out the issues of racism and so on. So obviously, Vice Chancellor, Chancellor Pakeng, whatever the case is a bit out of her depth. And a lot of people warned that when she was appointed to the position, she probably didn't really have the gravitas or experience to hold this kind of position. And it seems to be coming, this seems to be coming pretty clear now.
Yeah, no, regardless of what the merits of the arguments here, there's clearly the infighting going on in the university now is clearly not to its benefit in the slightest. Sara, any final thoughts before we move on?
Yeah, no, look, it started to hit the skids as soon as the Flawless movement took hold in 2015, and she came in after Max Price as the sort of the sort of black woman savior. And I have very little doubt that whatever happened, including the sort of further disintegration of the council, was not the work of someone sort of committed to the broader educational project, but it was all about transformation as defined by very distinct groupings within the university. And of course, as soon as you start to have this sort of aggro and fighting, each episode that you have brings it into further disrepute, and something eventually crumbles a bit. And so if it is our premier thingamajig institution, it won't be for much longer.
Indeed. I fear that may be the case. But then again, at the same time, as a graduate of Wits, I don't fear it that much. But that's neither here nor there. All right, let's move on.
I don't think there are any UCT graduates on this panel.
No. So yeah, perhaps we're just biased. Let's move overseas. We have an interesting election that we've been watching the run up to for a while now in Brazil, where they held over the weekend the first round of the voting for the presidential election. They also held votes for I think the Brazilian Senate and lower house as well. The poll suggested that Lula, who for a time was in jail for corruption, but then I think had that overturned on appeal. I think Marius knows more of the details of that than I do. Anyway, he's had this big political comeback where he went from being president of Brazil to in jail, and now he's once again the front runner for president, and the polls have showed him as such. Well, we got to see whether the polls were right. Bolsonaro has claimed that they were rubbish up till now, and Lula has indeed come first. He got 48.4% of the votes, with 99% of them counted, versus 43.2% for Bolsonaro. Brazil has a 2-round presidential election where if you don't get enough votes in the first round, then you go to the second round. So you need 50% to win the first round. And of course, Lula didn't get that. Bolsonaro did better than he polled. Polls suggested he would maybe not even crack 40% of the vote, but here he is with 43% of the vote. And there were some polls that suggested that Lula might get over 50, and yet he got just under that, which means he now has to go into that second round against Bolsonaro. There were 2 other candidates who got around, I think, 3 and 4% each, who will now drop out of the election race. Bolsonaro's party also did quite well in some of Brazil's Senate seats. They won 19 of 27 seats in the Senate, and also it looks like he's going to do relatively well in the lower house so far. And some of the analysis from Ruyter suggests that this is going to pressure Lula to take a more centrist approach rather than a more left-wing approach, because even if he wins the presidency, which he's still expected to do, he will be faced with a much less friendly legislature, which is much more right-wing than him. Marius, what do you make of all of this? It looks like the polls missed by a little bit here. And Bolsonaro, does he have a shot for the second round? What do you think?
Look, I suppose it depends who the people who didn't make it the second round decide to endorse and encourage their supporters to vote for. So the 2 people who came third and fourth, they're the only 2 people who got more than 1% of the votes. They both said they, going to keep their powder dry and only announce in the next week or 2 who they're going to encourage their supporters to vote for. But you would think that the fact that Lula got 48% means he's pretty close to, getting over the line in the second round, but a lot can still change. But also just to make the point that this would have only been the second time since Brazil became a democracy again that somebody would have won in the first round. The only time this has ever happened in since Brazil became a democracy in the 80s was in 1994, when Fernando and Enrique Cardoso won more than 50% of the votes. Only time that somebody's managed to avoid a runoff. And what's as you were saying, you're speaking about Bolsonaro's party, which is also called the Liberal Party. Not too many people call him the Liberal Party, or think of him as a liberal. But obviously, it's, these kind of the tags and way we talk about things are different around the world. But his party, as it stands now, will be the single biggest party in the lower chamber, or the lower house of parliament in Brazil, which is called the Chamber of Deputies. And Lula's party, which is the Workers' Party, is coming third. They're going to have about 50 seats in a 500-seat Congress. So, and there's also 23 parties that are probably going to have seats in the lower chamber. So it's going to be quite messy. It's probably going to make what happened in Joburg look like a picnic. So, yeah, so even Lula's, he's probably going to have his work cut out trying to get his kind of legislative agenda through. But all that said, when Lula was president in the noughties, he was a pretty centrist guy, actually. And, people were quite surprised. And Brazil did pretty well when he was president. It grew pretty quickly. The middle class grew quickly. As we've discussed before, a lot of that growth was because the government embarked on some unsustainable spending habits. And that caused some problems down the line. Brazil went through a mini economic crisis in the early 2010s. And, Lula himself, he went to jail. He was released on a technicality, but a lot of people, there was a thing called, I think it was called the car wash scandal, where a lot of people linked to Lula and the Workers' Party went to jail. And it's pretty much acknowledged as the biggest corruption scandal in Brazil's history, which tells you a lot when we know that Latin American countries are not exactly, known for not being corrupt. So if Lula was linked to the biggest corruption scandal ever in Brazilian history, it tells you something. But yeah, it remains to be seen. But there's also some worries about Bolsonaro's already said that this election has been flawed. Brazil uses electronic voting machines. Bolsonaro's also said these don't work properly and it's very easy to cheat and so on. So Brazil's institutions are going to be under pressure after this election, and we're going to have to see what Bolsonaro does.
Yeah, I must say I'm not a huge fan of electronic voting. As someone has observed a lot of paper ballot elections. There's every single voting system has problems, but I think that there's just a level of physical and non-technical verification that goes on in paper ballots. This is a complete aside that is actually difficult to replicate, that nothing else really comes close to. And yes, it makes it easier to count the votes. And in theory, if the system is working properly, it's very hard to cheat in an electronic system. But I really think people underrate paper ballots. And I'm glad that South Africa still uses paper ballots, I must say.
Less of a paper trail and all kinds of things. So I'm with you that electronic voting is not the greatest.
Sara, what do you make of all this? I don't know that much about Brazil and Brazilian politics, but I often get the feeling that Brazil actually has quite a lot of similarities to South Africa. It's this big, complicated, multiracial country. It's much bigger, of course, than South Africa, but it's got a lot of stuff going on, a lot of raw resources. It's quite a violent society. It's also got quite a bit of inequality like ours. So I wonder, that in many ways, I think Brazil might be kind of our cousin from across the sea. What do you take of this whole election?
No, I think that's right. I think there's much similarity, and I think, I remember the impressive thing about Lula being how popular he was when he got the presidency. The sort of beloved socialist, the Cosatu loved him. If that's anything to go by, but he was.
The ANC was very distraught when he lost power.
Yeah,
but spoke about South Africa. They said Zuma would be South Africa's Lula moment. They said Zuma was going to be our kind of Lula.
That's right. I think Zimbabwe may have been involved in that. But anyway, there was that real popularity, seen as, he was a trade unionist, seen as the man of the people, blah, blah, blah. And then undone like people often undone. I wish they were undone here to the same extent by, being linked to and part of as you say, a massive corruption scandal, and the period in jail, which took the shine off to such an extent that what you had in exchange was the sort of right-wing sort of weirdness of Bolsonaro to a large extent. So you had the one side, and then you had the other side. Now you've got the one side and the other side directly competing with each other, which theoretically should attract very different support bases. But I suppose to some extent, you'll have the sort of working class who will support Lula, and you'll have the other parts of the working class that will support Bolsonaro. Nick, I think you mentioned that Sao Paulo, which is huge, had sort of were very much in the Bolsonaro camp. So it's really the options are very, very, very different. But I suppose if Lula gets in and he's not got absolute free reign from the from one of the houses, it should bring him a bit to the center. But apropos of very little at all, I happened to see a picture of him on the stump, and I thought he looked really old. I thought he looked, sort of tired and washed out. But be that as it may, Bolsonaro just looks like he's going to be a bit like Berlusconi. He's going to have more and more work done as the years go on.
Berlusconi looks like a corpse, though. It's incredible, like a sort of like a plastic corpse. Anyway, I think it's actually often quite true in politics that the second time around, the second term, it doesn't matter what country you're in, which political system you're in. The second term is almost never as good as the first term. So I think if Lula does indeed win, he's going to have his work cut out for him. Anyway, okay, cool. We will see you tomorrow on the Daily Friend Show. I hope that those of you without electricity get it back soon. And I hope that, I've also heard there's a big water shortage maybe planned for some parts of Johannesburg. So check the news for that because, when it rains, it pours. Anyway.
No, it doesn't.
See you all soon. Indeed. See you all soon and have a good one. Cheers, everyone.